Every year in the United States, we celebrate Christopher Columbus Day. Like this is something to be proud of. Like this is something worthy of celebration. It's ridiculous. It's disgusting. And, of course, something we would do in this country. I remember in school being taught about Christopher Columbus. Not the real, true, fact-based history, but more of the sanitized 1800s Washington Irving biography version of he sailed the ocean blue in 1492 under the crown of Spain with the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and he was trying to discover a new trade route to India. He was trying to prove that the world was round, and all this other steaming hot garbage. And I remember in particular my fourth grade class when it came to learn about Christopher Columbus, the teacher started talking about the typical Christopher Columbus whitewash propaganda. And I simply asked, why are we celebrating this man for discovering America when he never stepped foot on what would eventually become the United States of America? Also, the Vikings did it first, and there's evidence other people did it first. And never mind, when he got there, there are already people there. Why are we just celebrating this man for discovering something that was already discovered? And you know what happened? I got sent to the principal's office for back-talking the teacher because he was teaching us bullshit. And that's how pervasive the pro-Christopher Columbus culture has been in this country for years, decades, generations, centuries. Is that we have advanced these lies about him and put him up on this pedestal like he's some great guy to worship. And anything other than that is true. Christopher Columbus was not this genius sailor. Sure, he had a good grasp on maritime winds and understanding how to sail based off of easterlies and westerlies. I'll give him that. But this is a guy that thought that the planet was thousands of miles smaller than it actually was. So he thought on his path to go find India and find a new trade route, which ultimately his initial destination was supposed to be Japan, that he was going to not need nearly the amount of time that it actually would have taken. And this whole notion of him setting out to prove the world was round is also complete and utter historical garbage, knowing that for decades, generations, centuries, millennia, there was a widely held belief that the world was indeed round. Now, that still doesn't deal with the part about the earth being the center of the universe, but nonetheless, this whole notion that he was setting out to prove the world was round is complete hot garbage. And it doesn't even deal with the fact that we classify this guy as discovering America when we have scientific evidence that other peoples actually landed on North America outside of the native indigenous people, mind you, because obviously that's a discussion in and of itself. I'm talking about Europeans and others, people coming from even the Polynesias and so forth. There's evidence that people were there centuries before Christopher Columbus, who ended up finding mostly the Caribbean Isles. So he didn't even step foot on what would become modern-day America in terms of the United States of America. How did he discover something when he never actually went there? So just the whole premise of us celebrating this day is borderline retarded. No, it is full-on retard. We celebrate a guy for discovering a place he actually didn't discover. The place that he did allegedly discover already had people there, which means somebody else discovered it first. And there's not even a guarantee that he was the first European to discover it. Why are we celebrating the guy? We are celebrating a failure. A guy who set out to do one thing and didn't even accomplish it. He did not find new trade routes to India. He stumbled into a different place that he didn't even know freaking existed, all the while basing it off of mathematics that were incredibly flawed, thinking that India was thousands of miles closer than it actually was. And that doesn't even deal with the part that is the most disgusting about this, is that we celebrate a guy that saw a people that initially were peaceful and welcoming of him and thought, you know what? They'll make good man and woman servants someday. Let's take some of them as slaves. Let's kill the rest. Let's chop them up. Let's claim the land as our own. And then use this as the initial beginnings of setting up the Atlantic slave trade. That's something that in the context of great historical figures you want to put on the resume. Created the Atlantic slave trade. Check. Murdered, enslaved, raped people, stole their property and their lands. Check. And of course, because we are Americans, we celebrate this numbskull. We celebrate this villain of history. Oh, he brought Christianity to the Western world and he helped civilize it. I'm sure the Christian God would be more than pleased with how this was done. Pretty sure he would be against it. Pretty sure that guy, Jesus, that these crimes against humanity were perpetrated and committed, would have been against it too. I don't know. Just saying. Just saying. So we celebrate him. And then you've got people that idiotically associate this with this some type of Italian-American pride thing. Give me a freaking break. If we want to celebrate some type of Italian-American or some type of Italian, let's find somebody else to do it. Now, I know some people are going to sit there and be the wise ass and sit there and say, well, we celebrate people like Washington and people like Jefferson and this and that. And you know what? You're absolutely correct. Unfortunately, they actually did help found this country, so there is already going to be those certain layers of propaganda built in, but we don't exactly totally ignore their history of who they were either. We, again, do kind of whitewash it. But Columbus never even stepped foot on modern-day America. We celebrate a guy for discovering something he didn't discover. We celebrate the big premise for why he did what he did when it wasn't even the premise for what he did to begin with. We celebrate somebody who was mathematically incompetent and failed to achieve his ultimate objectives. Not to mention all the stuff about him murdering people, enslaving them, and taking over their lands. This is not somebody worthy of a federal holiday. This is not somebody worthy of celebration. And for me to even go on Twitter today and see people celebrating this holiday and thinking that it is good, and seeing businesses advertise like they do every year their big Columbus Day sale. Okay, businesses, if we really truly want to keep up with the spirit of Columbus Day, can I come to your store, take your property, enslave or kill your employees and claim the store as my own? Can I do that? Because if not, then your Columbus Day sale is bullshit and is no way historically accurate. Now, as far as the part of changing it and calling it Indigenous Peoples Day, you're going to have some that will sit there and say, well, those people weren't exactly great either. They were very bad in some of the things they did. And all of that, honestly, is true too. They ultimately became the biggest victims of all because of white European settlers coming in and largely wiping them out. They were the victims ultimately of genocide. Yes, they did bad things and they perpetrated bad things, but how kind would you be to outsiders, foreign invaders coming in and killing you, taking your lands, raping your women, killing your kids, enslaving your population? How kind would you be to the people that were perpetrating that? Would you be saying, geez, I'm an Uncle Tom here, thank you, sir, may I have another ding dong, that's wrong? I don't think so. I don't even know why we need to have a fucking federal holiday for this either way, but if we're going to, you can call it Indigenous Peoples Day, and I'm fine with that, because at least we are trying to take some time to remember people that were victimized by colonization and mass genocide. Instead, what we do in this country is we celebrate a key architect of that genocide in Christopher Columbus, based off of historical inaccuracies and flat-out propaganda and lies. That's a shame. But unfortunately, that is who we are. That's what makes us Americans, is celebrating horrible people with dipshit holidays like Christopher Columbus Day. The fact that we celebrate it is disgusting and ridiculous, But it shouldn't be surprising because ultimately it is a representation of how dumb we are as a country. The holiday should end, replace it with something else. I don't care. Just make sure it's somebody or something that is worth celebrating other than this incompetent man who was horrible at math, who didn't even achieve his objective, didn't even do what he's given credit for, and did a lot of other bad things to people, all in the name of the cross. Fuck Christopher Columbus and fuck Christopher Columbus Day.